Welcome to Cars on Call. I am automotive journalist and gastroenterologist Steve Schutz, and we are without our co-hosts Adams Hudson and trauma surgeon Stefan Moran. But that's because we have a very special guest. I'm extremely honored to introduce our guest today, Joe Buzzetta, car enthusiast, new car dealer, motorcycle enthusiast, vintage racer, car collector, and he's now exploring a new facet of his automotive life, which I find very fascinating. He's looking into starting to create some bespoke air-cooled Porsche 911s, which we'll talk about a little later. He has a famous father, Joe Buzzetta Sr., who was a Porsche race driver back in the 60s, and we'll talk about his father too. But I'll just start off very quickly, Joe, before you kind of say a few words about yourself, and say, you and I met, we grew up in the same town in Long Island, and we overlapped not that long in high school, but we would ride the bus together. And I remember we would sit together and talk cars. And I was so impressed back then because your knowledge of cars was encyclopedic. It was deep and wide. I read about cars all the time, so I knew about cars, and I was completely obsessed with cars. But your knowledge back then, Joe, struck me, and obviously we both continued into the car world. Welcome! I'm so psyched to have you.
Thank you. I mean, after that introduction, I hope I can live up to all that.
Piece of cake, Joe.
Oh my God. Well, I have to say, I thought the same of you in high school. I'm like, boy, who is this guy? He knows so much about cars. And, frankly, it was a relief because I pretty much hated school. So any opportunity to talk about something other than school was great. And I was thankful for you. We hit it off right away, and cars were the glue that did it,
Yes. We were talking earlier, and I think that's true for a lot of people. And I have met so many people. As you know, Joe, I've been very fortunate over almost 30 years to be a car reviewer, a new car reviewer. So I've been writing about cars, and I've been an automotive journalist part-time, of course. But I've had a lot of car experiences, and I've met a lot of car people. And it's amazing. It doesn't matter how you got into the car world or what your background is. You connect.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So there is a question that my co-host Stefan, who is a great guy, trauma surgeon, and he saved so many lives. He's really the main genesis of this show. He talks about safety from the trauma surgeon perspective, but he always asks guests, "Hey, what was your taproot moment?" And I'll tell you one. I'll tell you mine, Joe, and I want to hear yours. And as soon as I started thinking about this moment, I realized it actually is indirectly connected to you, or at least your father. So I was walking through Nessaquag, walking home, and this guy pulls up, and I kind of knew him somehow. I think I was 12. He must have known one of my parents. And he said, "Hey, do you want to ride?" And I said, "Sure." And he was a prosperous guy, but he was driving a BMW 530i. And this was my first experience with a luxury car that was not a Lincoln. It was not a Cadillac. It wasn't a floaty car. Mm-hmm. And it had a stick shift, and it was a nice car, but it was a BMW. I'm sure your dad sold him that car. That for me opened my eyes, and I decided, oh, okay, there's a car for me out there, because I wasn't interested in the floaty big cars. That was for me the moment where I said, okay, I think I know where I want to go with cars. What was your moment?
Man, that's a hard question. I got to really go deep into the memory banks. So many memories as a kid. I mean, I grew up with cars. My dad was a car guy, and he was a racer. He was a car dealer. It might have been just being around the shop. They started out with a small shop, basically mechanical repair, and selling a few used cars and whatever they could get in and out of the door to make money. But at the same time, they were campaigning a Porsche race car, And I remember being at the shop on Saturday, even as a kid, they'd bring me in, let me sweep the floors and, chase the stray cats out of the cars outside and stuff like that. And I remember seeing that car, you know, in the building inside in the shop, and the floor. My dad and his partner were just obsessed with cleanliness, so didn't have a lot of money, but they probably painted the floor every couple of months. It was a gleaming, shiny gray concrete floor, and here was this white prototype Porsche. It was probably a 906, I'm thinking, because I know it was white. Uh, it almost looked like a Matchbox car come to life. I mean, as a kid, I could sort of relate to it, even though I knew it was really expensive and really delicate. I wasn't allowed to touch certain things, but they had me around it and helping to clean it and this and that, and it was just so cool. And it was, a bit polarizing for me to see that car there. I didn't quite understand all of it. It looked a little delicate, looked a little dangerous. Maybe I like that. I don't know. That was probably one of the moments. And then, several rides with my dad. He was a fantastic driver, even a street driver, just a very precise, methodical driver. And I used to love to watch him drive. Everything he did had a purpose. It wasn't that he was flying or going so fast. Most racers on the street don't drive that fast because, they really don't have to. There's nothing to prove. And they go at a, an efficient rate, usually not the speed limit, which is too slow, but an efficient rate. And he just drove very efficiently and very precisely. And I like to watch him. So that was another thing that really got to me. I just decided, I want to be a driver one day, a good driver. I want to drive like that. I want to enjoy my car. I could see he knew how to enjoy the car. That was important to me. So it's hard.
Yeah,
It's hard for me to just say that there was one moment, but those two things stick out in my early years as things that were, made a difference for me.
Yeah, your youth was more filled with car stuff than most people, certainly more than mine. So it makes
Yeah.
sense. I'll just say very quickly, you after your dad died, which was I think earlier this year, I think January-ish.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
January.
We had we mentioned him on a show and had a little eulogy. And I mentioned your
Yeah, I
dad,
saw that.
and
That was really nice. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. And the thing that struck me about your dad back then, of course, I was young, 14ish, and I liked that he was nice to me. He was a very nice
Mhm.
man.
Yeah,
But
he was. Yeah.
the thing, he would drive me home, drive us home from school if there was an after school activity. And
Right.
by the time you're 14, you have been in parents' cars times like 30, 40, 50 different parents
Yeah.
over all those years. And I'd
Yeah.
seen many, many parents driving. It's always the same. And then all of a sudden, I drove with, I was in the car with your dad. I'm like, whoa, this
Yeah.
is different.
Yeah.
And I was really struck by the smoothness, acceleration, braking, steering. Everything was so smooth. And you're right. I never felt like he sped. And it's the safest I've ever felt in a car.
I remember you saying that, and that's true. We were as a family, of course, drove around a lot. He always drove. In those days, the man always drove, and we were in some tight spots. Blizzards and things like that. And you could just see that he had a skill set. A couple of times where we were, I mean, and you're driving 1970s Jeep Wagoneers too, by the way. It's not like today's cars where, you just drive it and some lights come on the dash and, some electronic babysitter just saved you from sliding off the road. Those cars were totally analog and, bad tires, bad brakes. And a few times up in Vermont, we were driving in blizzards and, you had to be a good driver to not go off the road. And he never put a toe off. You could see he was working, but he knew exactly what the car was doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, racers are always practicing.
Perfecting
Exactly. I was
their
looking for that extra inch here and there.
Yeah. Hey, there's a moment. You told me about this a while ago, but I want to circle back because it does involve your dad. And I know this is not a taproot moment, but I know this was a formative moment for you. You and your father, I can only imagine how busy your father was. He's running a very successful business. He's got a family, but running a
Yeah.
very successful business is, as you know, it takes lots of time and lots of attention. And if you don't give your business time and attention, it's going to fail. So I know he was very busy, but he took time out, and you two did a very special trip in 1984. I remember you told me about it. I just found the story amazing. Go ahead and relay that story.
Yeah, sure. Well, he wanted to buy Ferrari 512 BBI, which in that time period was, one of the faster cars on the road. And he had a 246 Dino that he owned for maybe 6 or 7 years before that. Anyway, he ordered the 512 and then decided that we should do a trip together to Europe and pick it up. So we picked the car up at the factory, which of course was, an epic thing to do.
And this is really
And
just the two of you.
well, it actually, his best friend actually wanted one also, so they ordered one. So it was actually two cars and four guys. So it was me and my dad and my friend Eric and his dad Howie.
Yeah.
So we picked them up at the same time. We were together for a number of days, and then they went their way and we went our way. They had a different trip plan. But we basically spent 10 days driving around Europe in this thing, brand new 512. And we had an unbelievable time, as a father and son. I mean, not just driving, but visiting a lot of his old friends at the Porsche factory. We went to Weissach and we spent a day there, when Helmut Bott was still the director of Weissach. And, he and my dad were friends. You couldn't really go there. Even a good customer wasn't allowed to go there and see what was going on. It was like the equivalent of going to NASA. It's all experimental stuff. By coincidence, I think Car and Driver Road and Track the month before their issue featured Weissach, and they sent their journalist there, and he saw a lot of stuff, but not everything. He saw a lot. We saw everything. We went through. We were with Mr. Bott. He had his keys, and it was the old-fashioned, like a janitor's key ring, and he whisked every door. We saw the 959s in development.
Really?
928 S4 prototype that he was actually driving. I had no interior, just the engine and just a gutted out car, and he was putting miles on the drivetrain. So we did a lot of cool stuff like that. Went to the Porsche factory, we visited them, and I met some of his original mechanics that were on the team. We just had a ball, and driving around in that car, in Europe was pretty epic. I mean, in those days, there weren't many cars that could cruise at, 120, 130 miles an hour sustained. I mean, today, as you know, any of these big sedans will do that. But in those days, if you were driving something like that, I mean, you were king of the Autobahn, really. I mean, you could cruise at 130, 140 with that thing, no problem. And it was an unbelievable trip. He let me drive a little bit, which I was surprised because I was 18 years old. I mean, driving in Europe on the Autobahn at 18 is, I can't even fathom that. But he let me do that. And at one point, I'm not sure where we were so long ago, but it started pouring rain. And he was tired. He fell asleep in the passenger seat. So now I'm all by myself. I got the directions. I kind of know, all right, we're going to go, 60 kilometers and make this turn. He had it all written down. And it was just like a Zen moment by myself in this Ferrari, 18 years old on the Autobahn, heavy rain. So it's probably down to like, 80 or 90 miles an hour tops, maybe not even that. And I was like, wow, this is incredible,
Yeah, that's amazing. And as a son, you always have a certain vision of your parents, but you couldn't have really understood what his racing life was like. And you must have gotten a window into that when he shows up at the factory and the mechanics come out. There must have been a bond that you saw.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was actually I felt like it actually brought tears to my eyes because what I saw that at that point was interesting. So the way I remember it, we pull up to this courtyard and there's a guard tower, and we pull up with this bright red Ferrari, and the guard is, your stereotypical German, he looks like a, Gestapo almost, and he looks down at us and he's, grinding us for credentials and paperwork and who do you know and this and that. And in the courtyard is like, these kind of dark orange, like that Porsche red orange door color, and with that, one of the doors opens up and it was like something out of a movie. Three guys in Porsche, mechanics overalls with the Porsche logo, the red overalls, come out. And with that, one of them, points at the guard and says something in German. The guard immediately opens the gates. We drive this Ferrari in. These three guys get my dad out of the car and put him up on their shoulders. They were so happy to see
Wow.
him. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God. And what I learned later on, one of the reasons for that is he was very well liked by the mechanics and staff on the team because he was the guy who was like the regular guy. He would stay up late. They were having a transmission problem, having to sort something out. He, instead of, going into town and chasing girls or going to the hotel and getting extra sleep, he'd stay at the track, drive the car around, test it, make sure it was fixed before the next guy came for his shift, and stuff like that. He was more of a down to earth person than I think some of the other guys on the team. Not to say anything bad about them. They're all great guys, but
Sure.
it was a different kind of an order, I guess. I don't know. He was more, coming from a mechanics background. To him, it was just normal. Hey, we got something to fix. What do I do? How can I help? So I think he was well regarded by them for that reason. And
Yeah. And
yeah,
of
it was
course
awesome.
you would,
Awesome to see.
yeah, it's one thing to see a driver return and be, embraced. It's another thing if it's your father. And I think it's worth mentioning that part of the bonds between any of these racing teams, among any of these racing teams, were magnified because this was a very dangerous period. Many of these
Yeah.
drivers did not survive.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. My dad actually, he retired in 1970 and he had an opportunity to drive for Ferrari. They called him and they had seen what he'd done at Porsche. And I think they were thinking, it wouldn't be a bad thing to, mimic that, have an American on the team. It's, politically correct. And he thought about it for more than a minute. And I know my mother was dead set against it. His parents were dead set against it. And my dad was the type of guy that, he would consider everybody's opinion. But at the end of the day, if he wanted to do something, he was going to do it. And everybody just got to follow along. But he told me later in years that he just saw too many of his friends die in cars. And Ferraris at the time were just known to be bad wrecks. They went on fire. Porsches generally, you could wreck the car, and as long as you were in one piece, you could get out of it. He just thought, if I go with Ferrari, it might be the end of me. So, yeah.
And you got kids. It's time to walk away. One of the things I admire about an old driver, Hans Hermann, I'm sure your dad drove with Hans Hermann. He won the first Le Mans for Porsche in 1970, the 917, and he promised his wife that would be his last race. He won, and he kept his word. That was the last race he ever raced. And if you got kids and you're a father, you're a father. You got to do that. So
yeah, I think about that myself sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, what a trip.
Yeah.
One thing I found interesting was that young in your life, not 1984 young, but into your 20s and 30s, you kind of caught the motorcycle bug. So what was the story there? What attracted you to motorcycles? Was you were a kid and you like motorcycles, or what's the story there?
Motorcycles for me were speed. That was the attraction initially. My dad bought me a 90cc Kawasaki when I was, let me think, I guess I was 11, probably 11. And it was just, something I rode around the neighborhood. It was fun, but I didn't see it as necessarily any future in it. It was just, something to do. And sold that when I got my first car. And, most people have a similar story. But around 1988, I guess, I was working at the dealership as a salesperson. And a couple of my friends who actually, I didn't even know that they were really into motorcycles. They were from I was into water skiing at one time also. And these were buddies of mine that I see on the boat. We go skiing after work. And they roll up on these two pretty new super bikes. And I'm like, wow, those things are cool. I mean, first of all, they were beautiful to me. I loved how you could see the engine and all the mechanicals were right out there. It was really, motorcycles, especially Japanese bikes at the time, they took a lot of care to make sure everything looked really nice and, everything had a good finish on it. So I like that. And I'm like, wow, these things are beautiful. So we chatted a little bit and then they left and just the sound and the speed, they just jetted off. I was like, man, within a month, I had a bike, and I started riding with them, and I fell in love with it. But initially, it was mostly because I love the speed. 1988. I mean, a Corvette had what, 200 horsepower.
Yeah.
Ferrari had, I don't know, what did a Testarossa have? Maybe 300 horsepower or something like that. Uh, a motorcycle, you could buy a motorcycle that was 450 pounds and had 140 horsepower. I mean, the power to weight was intoxicating. So that's really what started it for me. But then I realized I really enjoyed riding them. They're a lot of fun. Similar to cars, there's a lot of camaraderie with motorcyclists, and it's different with different kinds of bikes. There's the Harley crowd has one idea of motorcycling, and super bikes are doing something else, and it's a nice bunch of people, though. It's really, some of my best friends are all through motorcycles. So so it's a lovely hobby, lovely sport. Really is a lot
Did
of fun.
you gravitate away from the superbike style, and did that evolve, or are you still mostly, a Ducati type of a guy, or Ninja type of guy?
It's a mixed bag for me. I like anything fast, honestly. I love super bikes. Most of my super bikes are older. They're a little bit more comfortable than the new ones. The new ones are really cramped, and I'm not that big of a guy, but my body doesn't bend well enough to fit on the new bikes. Nor do I really have an interest in 200 horsepower and 380 pounds. To me, it's just I don't think my brain can work fast enough anymore to really ride something like that. But I do enjoy the super bikes, just shorter rides. I can't ride them for hours anymore. Uh, my favorite type of bike is probably more of a standard style that's still got decent power and handling, but a little bit more upright, a little bit easier to ride. Early Kawasaki's, Suzuki's, things like that are a lot of fun to ride, and you can modify them. You can change the suspension and brakes, and tune the engine a little bit better than they were originally, and all of a sudden you got a great bike. And they're fast enough, sort of akin to a 60s, 70s muscle car versus a new 911 GT3. It's just they're still fun. They're just a little bit older mechanicals and a little less capable, but still a lot of fun. That's probably my go-to at this point.
Yeah. Okay. That's one thing I never really got that into motorcycles. I was never that curious. I think it was 100% fear that kept me away from motorcycles. So
Yeah. Well, a lot of guys feel that way, and I think if that's how it is, then you should stay away from it. I mean, people ask me sometimes, why did you get into it? Why do you still ride? It's so dangerous and this and that. You can't be a fatalist if it's something you want to do, but there's a tremendous risk with motorcycles. There's no question. I mean, you could have a 20-mile-an-hour incident with a car, and really what's going to happen? You're basically going to bend your car up and go home. Motorcycle, you could lose a leg, you could have a catastrophic injury. It's really definitely a dangerous activity, but I've been lucky over the years. I don't know if it's just skill or just luck, but I've been lucky. I've had a couple of minor falls, nothing that really hurt me too badly, but I've known some guys that have gotten seriously hurt and worse. So yeah, it's a tough thing.
yeah,
I will tell you, I do ride less. I'm more into cars the last 5 to 6 years than I am into bikes. I ride more occasionally now, and maybe that is the reason. I think cars are. I can have a lot of fun in a car, and there's metal around you. You don't feel as exposed.
yeah. Um, anyway, your dad created this network of car dealerships, and now you and your siblings run that. Very, very successful enterprise, as I said earlier. Um, Running a successful business is hard work, and it's a lot of decisions, and it's lonely at the top. I've got a medical practice that is very, very busy, and it's very
Yeah.
successful, and we've got 150 employees, and you've got to take care of your employees, but you're not friends with your employees, so
No.
it's a little bit lonely at the top. Is that hard for you?
It's not hard anymore. I think when I was younger, it was hard. I worked with people, side by side. It's hard not to become friendly, and most people desire a friendship with the boss or the owner. And I wasn't always an owner. I mean, I'm saying when I was coming up through management and whatnot. But you're right. You really have to be very careful. I made the mistake of being friends with people here and there, and it did bite me a little bit. Um, it's you've got 150 employees. I mean, it's really all about the people, the right people, and it takes a long time to fine tune that. And you're always fine tuning it. You could have things 100% great, and then your favorite person who's running this division gets an offer from somebody else, and they're gone, and then you have a big void, and it's back to, all right, how are we going to fill this void and make it work again? Yeah, the business for us it's been our whole life, really. And my dad started it. He really kind of retired in the 90s. He decided he didn't want to work that much anymore. He started going to Florida a lot. So he left it with us. And I was in the business first, then my brother, and then my sister came into it. And we've been very successful. We've been fortunate to have enough stores that we can spread out so we're not right on top of each other. I've seen family businesses where everybody's under one roof, and it's just nothing but stress, and nobody gets along, and it's awful. I mean, it really can be awful. So we haven't had any of that, which I'm thankful for. And we've got wonderful franchises. Being a car guy, it's nice to sell cool cars. And that, I've always, honestly, BMW has always been my go-to brand of the stuff that we sell. We have Mercedes also, Infiniti and Subaru, and we've had Toyota and Nissan also in the past. But BMW is really my favorite brand that we have. It's just a true enthusiast brand. So to me, it's fun to be in a business, and at the same time, you're parlaying it into something really cool. It's exciting when the new M3 comes out, or the new whatever the latest spaceship they're coming out with these days. So it's been fun. It's been fun. It's been very good for our family. We've made good money with it. We've employed a lot of great people. We've been able to help other people and other businesses along the way. It's been a very fortunate thing. And my dad was, I have to say, very visionary in the beginning, because when he started it, it was really small. And the franchises we got were, Datsun, for example, in the 60s. I mean, I think they had three models. They had a pickup truck, station wagon, and a sedan, and they had the little sports car. But platform sharing, very simple cars. And but he saw something in that, and we eventually became a pretty big Nissan store for 25 years. So
Yeah, it's cool. We had a dealer on earlier this year named Gary Duncan. He's from Virginia, and he's actually kind of king of the JDM world. So he sells the little Nissan Figaros and POWs and that kind of thing, and the little trucks.
yeah, I know what those are. Yeah, they're cute.
He
Cute
sells
cars.
a lot of them, but he
Yeah,
has new stores, and
yeah.
he said that it can be a little prickly sometimes working with the manufacturers. They can be a challenge. I'm sure you
Oh yeah.
found that here and there.
Oh, that that would be like two more podcasts, Steve. I don't know. And they'd probably cancel my franchise after they see what I have to say. But I honestly, most of our experience with the manufacturers has been good. We've had good partnerships with them, and I know dealers that are constantly in a tug of war with their OEMs, and we're just not that. We roll with it. We do the best with what tools they give us, which is usually enough. That with great product. Mercedes and BMW, they just they have fantastic R&D. Not everything that they build is a raging success, but mostly what they build is really good.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, we've had really good run with it, and hoping to keep doing it. That's some
cool.
third generation coming in now too. So
Yeah. One thing that we've talked about that I really want to hear more about, because this is, away from work, it's relaxation. Obviously, your job is stressful. Being the boss of any enterprise is stressful, especially if it's large like yours. And you've kind of gone into vintage racing as presumably a stress reliever. I guess the need for speed too. It's almost like the motorcycle thing. Talk about how you got into vintage racing and what you're doing with that now.
Yeah, so it is a stress reliever. It's funny because some people think of racing as like you're going to go there and it's like, going to be like a boxing match or something like that. It's really not that. It's mostly a lot of strategy. I call it high speed problem solving, is really what it is. But yeah, it's a ton of fun. It's the cars that we like. If you choose vintage, you can obviously drive whatever makes you happy. Um, and the cars are fantastic. Again, like motorcycling, you meet really, really great people. It's only my third season, so I'm still pretty new to it, but I'm learning and I'm getting better. And you meet guys that have been doing it, 20, 30 years and more, and most of them are always really helpful. It's a very, you get out on the track. I mean, everybody wants to everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to, beat the next guy, but it's also helping each other, taking care of your competitor because you need people to race against. In any given group, whatever car you have, let's say there's, for example, 20 cars in a group, and you go out for a half an hour race. There's probably only 2 or 3 cars out of that 20 that really are comparable enough to yours that considering, let's say, drivers have a similar skill set and cars have a similar speed potential, you've got to take care of those guys. I mean, if there's nobody to race against, it's no fun. I mean, it's great to have the fastest car and go out and beat everybody, but that's not really skill. That's just having a faster car. So the idea is to help one another, and I like that. And it's a lot of fun driving on the track, going fast, strategizing, try to figure out where a guy might be a little bit weak, and try to take advantage of him here and there. They're doing the same thing to you. Yeah, it's great. I always say I can't wait till the next race. It's like, what is I'm trying to think the famous quote.
Maybe it's Steve McQueen.
Steve
Racing
McQueen.
is,
Yeah,
racing
racing
is
is
life.
life.
Everything else is just waiting.
Yeah. Which, in my life, that's not really true because I have so many other things going on. There's no waiting, but I will tell you, when I leave the track and I come home, I'm checking the calendar. When's the next one? I can't wait to get back.
Yeah,
And
and
it's fun too. Yeah, I was
yeah,
just gonna say the other thing
mhm.
is the cars. I wouldn't
Mm.
want to drive a car I don't like. So the first thing I did, the first car I raced and I bought for myself was a Lotus 23, which I always liked those cars. And it turned out to be everything I thought. I've enjoyed it immensely. There's a good competitive group in the 2 clubs that I race in, so we have guys to race against, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great little car. And then I bought one of my dad's cars last year. He had a 1971 Chevron B19 sports racer, so I'm learning how to drive that. It's on slicks. It's a much more serious car than the Lotus, but I'm doing pretty well with that, and it's a lot of fun. Uh, Much faster car, which is good. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, your roots are obviously in Porsche, but I found it interesting you're racing that Chevron, which if I
Yeah,
think it has a Ford engine.
yeah. It's a Cosworth
Yeah.
2 liter. They were powered by a few different things. BMW made I think a 2.2 for it. But yeah, mostly Cosworth. It's a very potent car. I mean, it's about 1,100 pounds and 300 horsepower. So it's pretty potent. I mean, I can tell you, I was at a track day last week just doing some practice. We were changing some gears and changing my seat. And there was a guy with a pretty new, I don't know what kind of Porsche it was, but it was a track prepared, like a GT3 or something like that. And those cars are fast. I mean, he could pull me on the straights, but as soon as we got into the turns, as much grip as he had and power, he just couldn't get rid of me. He'd point me by, a half a lap was about all he could stand. So they're very, very cool little cars and pretty safe to drive. A lot of brakes, a lot of grip, you know. Um, but yeah, it is a stress reliever. I come back from those weekends, and because of all the strategizing and all the fun you're having, it's just like it's probably what some people do with yoga, but I do it at racing instead.
Yeah, I've never. I have to say, Joe, I never looked at racing and thought, oh, that looks like high speed yoga.
Well, I don't know how else to describe it. I just, yeah, it's. I'll tell you, you would relate to this because I know you like to drive. Sometimes when you're on a country drive, you're on a back road with your favorite car, and there's nobody in front of you, and it doesn't. You're not necessarily going at a breakneck speed, but everything's just clicking. You know, the shifting, the braking points, everything's working. You're enjoying your car. That's what the best day of racing is like. When your car is going good, you know, you're going good. Um, your lap times are coming down. You're figuring out a corner that you used to do a certain way, and now you're doing it a little bit differently. That's really the fun of it. It's very, I'll say, it's very satisfying. That's what it really is. You know.
Do you envision, as this evolves and as time goes on, you're gonna maybe get into some vintage Porsche racing, or you think you'll stick with the Chevron, or what are your thoughts for how that might come out?
Yeah, I think Porsches are. I'd love to campaign an RSR, a 911 based car. And they're, you can build one. You don't necessarily have to have an original car, which is today a $2.5 million car, an early RSR. You can build something very similar for a few $100,000 and race that. I'm definitely interested in that. And, we have my dad's collection of prototypes, and those can be, two or three of them are already recommissioned and ready to go. And we're going to take them out to Rennsport. And it's not necessarily wheel to wheel racing, but you're going really fast on the track and you're using the car as it was intended. That's to me the best place for those types of cars. When they were $50,000 and $100,000 cars, people would just take them and use them up in vintage racing. But that's 40 years ago. I mean, today they're more, coveted. I mean, some of them, they only build 25 or 30 of them, and you really don't want to go out and bend it up. When I'm driving one of my cars, I really don't think about it. I don't want to have an accident, but if I have an accident, the last thing I'm worried about is bending the car up. I can either replace it or fix it. But, with a prototype Porsche 906, 910, 908, it's going to take you years to repair it, and it may never be right. It's hard to find people that even, restore and repair those cars anymore. So, but to answer your question, Rennsport is a good venue for that. There's also some other companies that do special events just for those cars. That would be my interest in the old prototype stuff. But I think at some point I'm going to build an RSR for the track and campaign that. There's some really good racing in SVRA and HSR for those cars, and I think it'd be a lot of fun.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
I am curious. I have seen your personal collection. I'm curious about how you put it together. It's very eclectic. I think many, if not most, enthusiast collectors kind of focus on one brand. So you'll have Porsche collectors, of course, but you've got Ferrari collectors, Lamborghini muscle car collectors, and there'll be Mopar. Your collection has American cars. I know you like Fords. You do have, of course, Porsche, but it's eclectic. Talk about that, because I find your collection fascinating.
Thank you. I appreciate it. For me, it's just there's certain brands I do like, but I don't necessarily dislike any brand. I like cars. If I see a car and I think it's a beautiful car, it's interesting to me. It could be a Japanese car, it could be an Italian car, German car, American, whatever. For me, it's about driving. I like cars that drive well. I've bought some cars that were like a dream car, and they're more or less stock originals or restored to original, and you drive them, and it's like meeting your hero. You go, oh my God, this guy's really a jerk now that I've met him. And some of those cars are, not the greatest driving cars, not how we would have imagined, but it's fun to improve them. That's what I like. So, for example, you can take a 1960s Mustang and you can put, modern suspension that many different people make. It bolts right in. You're not cutting the car up. You're not damaging the car. You're just improving it. You're putting in suspension that's designed on a computer CAD, and it's made out of chrome moly steel and not stamped steel. The car actually is easier to align even by the time you're done with it. So you can do, Willwood brakes. You can do modern suspension. You can put some chassis stiffeners in it. Now all of a sudden you've got a good basis for a car that becomes more of a driver's car. And you can put a 450 horsepower small block in it, put a Tremec 5 or 6 speed behind it. Now you got a real driver's car. So I've built some stuff like that. I've got a Ford and Shelby addiction a little bit, and I like to modify those. Not too far, not cutting them up, just bolt in. Sometimes the Shelby guys will get mad at you. Why'd you do that? But to me, there's all the stock parts in a box. You can always put it back. So that to me is fun. Hot rodding, modifying cars. Japanese cars, Datsun Z cars. I grew up with those. My first car was a 77 280. So I like those. And again, really easy. There's companies that build better suspension, better brakes. So, you and I could do it on a Saturday on a lift. You don't have to be a genius. It's fun to do, and the car drives a lot better. Becomes an outlaw maybe.
My partner Stefan is such a Shelby nut, and he's having a Cobra replica being built right now. I think it's ERA is doing it, but he's a nut. So I will channel Stefan and say, talk more about your Ford products. Which Fords do you have?
Well, I have mostly Mustangs. I have a 67 GT500 that, again, we modified it with bolt-in suspension and brakes, and the car is light years better than they were originally. It's got a newer built 427 with a lot of power, Tremec 5-speed. So again, it still drives like an old car. It's nowhere near a new car, but it's 50% better, if that's a good way to put it. I've got a 66 Fairlane, and it's kind of the same way, modified. It looks like an R-code Fairlane, but it's more modern and drives fantastic. Coil-over suspension, for example. The Porsches are more of for me, trying to get the more period correct hot rods, so you can take an early 911 and, put better components than they had, but not that much better. It's still pretty much the way that they were built, but, through better shocks and more precise sway bars and better brakes and things like that. As good as those early 911s were, they can be a lot better. So that's kind of the fun with those cars. And, a little bit of engine modifications too. I've got an old 911E that I'm building a 2.7 for. It should be pretty cool. It's going to be a RS spec 2.7, and that'll wake that car up a little bit, from the original 140 horsepower.
Yeah, I think it's going to wake up a lot.
Yeah.
One car that struck me, you just finished building it, was, as I recall, a 78 911 SC. You had completely reworked, and I found it fascinating, and I was fortunate enough to drive it. Thank you. But it was eye-opening because that car was obviously conceived and executed as a analog 911 driver's car. Talk about obviously that's what you wanted, but how did that all come together? That could not have been easy.
So the idea for that car is, I've always been an RSR freak. I mean, I think back in the early to mid 80s, first RSR I saw was at the track. My dad was at a vintage race, and the guy had painted it just all gloss black. It was just black. The car was just demonic looking with that wide body. And I thought, man, that's a cool car. I'd like to have one of those for the street one day. So I thought this SC, which is, they're a good basis because, they're a galvanized car. They don't rust like the early cars, and they're good. They're good cars. So we gutted it. We made it as light as we could. We did a wide body on it, and just set about to make it a really nice all-around street car. Not too far, not full coil over suspension or too slammed to the ground. I wanted something that still rode nice over railroad tracks and things like that. But it's a badass little 911. It's got a 3.2 liter in it, pretty high RPM. I think it's about 72 or 7,300. 260, 270 horsepower, something like that. Nice gear ratios. Yeah, I mean, that car, the idea for that was lightweight, efficient, kind of Spartan, but still a full interior. So if I want to take my kids, it has a back seat with seat belts. It's got a roll bar in it, more for effect than anything else, just a single hoop. But again, the aesthetic was, an outlaw slash race car for the street. I call it a hot rod. I think that's in keeping with hot rodders. Take a stock car and modify it, make it better than the original, more efficient, faster, but better to drive. And that was the impetus for the car. I think we nailed it on that car, really.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I can imagine taking it through Vermont in October with the
Oh, it
foliage
was great. It was great.
on great roads, and yet the seats are comfortable. Shifting is not a chore, and I can imagine at high speed for a few hours through winding roads, and you stop and have lunch and talk to your friends. I can imagine that car would be perfect.
Oh, it's a joy. It's a joy. And we tried several different exhaust systems to get the sound right. We really worked hard on the shifter. I didn't want something that felt like a gated race car. I wanted something that was short throw, but still soft yet precise. To me, it's important to get a car's controls balanced. The weight of steering should be similar to the weight of the brake pedal and the clutch pedal, the shifting. That's what you don't have with early American cars. This has nothing to do with this or the brake, so you can improve that. Porsches, of course, are always known for that. And if you start improving them, they only get better. But yeah, we worked very hard on that car to make it a driver's car. I'm actually building another one now, which is going to be a little more extreme. And I'm almost worried it's going to be too radical, but I designed it that way. I wanted something faster, a little bit more hard edge for the street. It's going to be more of a, get in and drive me hard car, not necessarily a casual. The car you're describing, you could drive it every day. I see a nice stretch of weather for a week, I'll just drive it for a week. It's just a pleasure, really.
The new one, you think that'll be track or just road and drive for an hour instead of driving it all day?
Yeah, road and track. The car, I actually had built it once, and the suspension that's in it, I've driven it, and it's pretty stiff. It's tolerable for the street, but you got to watch what road you're on. You got to plan your moves a little bit. It's fantastic on the track. I mean, it's got fully adjustable coilovers. The car is fantastic, honestly. I mean, I was at VIR with that car, and it had nowhere near the straight line speed of new Porsches. I was at a Porsche event, so I'm out there with guys with GT2s, GT3s. I mean, they're literally twice the horsepower. But in the turns, my old RSR was like, I mean, these guys, a couple of guys came into the paddock afterwards like, boy, I just can't believe you were glued to me. And I know it's not necessarily me as a driver. The car just had so much grip, and the suspension was so dialed in. I mean, it doesn't care about bumps. But on the street, it's going to be, it's going to be a little tough, a little bit too stiff. And it's all Heim jointed, so it's noisy too. It's not like a street car where you have rubber bushings and things designed to have a little bit of give. This has no give at all. It's just absolutely metal to metal to metal, so. But it'll be fun. When you come next time, you'll drive that one.
I can't wait. It sounds raw and extreme and obviously effective. When you think really about fun. The 911, we both love them. It's a car that's endured. I love that it was born in 1963, which is the year of my birth. It may be you're either 63 or 64.
Same, 63. Yeah.
So I love that, and of course I'm personally proud that it was Peter Schutz that saved it in 1981. No relation. No relation, but
still the last name.
The same last name.
Sure.
When you think about 911s, what's good about them? What's bad about them? And yeah.
Well, the early cars, the only thing I would say is bad. And when I say early, I mean from, the beginning up until really the 70s. Ventilation's not good in the car. They never really got that right. It's being an air-cooled car, trying to use the heat off the exhaust system. it's effective, but it's it's kind of either on or off, hard to meter. And then the later cars, well, pretty much right from the beginning, but I think by the mid 60s, they had figured out, how to put a booster fan in it and get the front to have some defrost in it, or you could have fresh air, but it really never does anything quite well. And I've been in, rainstorms and been on road trips with those cars, and it gets foggy. The later cars have air conditioning, so it doesn't matter. It takes all the humidity out. But the early cars struggle with that. And thank God the early cars have the vent windows. That helps tremendously.
Yes. Yep.
I have a Ferrari Dino also, and the same thing. That car, the difference between the vent windows open or closed is like night and day. I don't know why Porsche ever got rid of that. I have a first year 930 turbo, and again, I was so happy. It's got those little windows that open. It just makes a big difference. But I think that's the worst thing about those cars. Everything else, there's nothing about them I don't like, really. They're just fantastic driver's cars. I think probably one of the best designs ever, really, when you think about it. And I don't say that just because I'm a fan. I mean, just look at how long that thing endured and how much they did with it. They're not only tough and durable, they're reliable, but they're just fun. Any iteration, even the 912s, it doesn't really matter. But I think the worst is the ventilation. If I had to have one thing to complain about,
I was emailing a friend who had a 1980, I think, SC Pacific Blue Metallic with the black fused wheels, and it was a coupe, and he sold it, and he regrets it. And I told him that I think that the G-body 911, particularly the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, is having a moment. And there's something about the design of that generation that resonates today more than a lot of its competitors. You certainly don't hear anything about Corvettes from that era or any other cars that you think might have more of a moment. By the way, more popular, much more desirable back then was the Mercedes SL and the S-Class sedan. The 911 was way overshadowed by the SL particularly. And yet the SL is not having a moment, and I don't think it's going to have a moment, but there's something about that generation and that style that is very attractive today.
Yeah, it could. I believe you're right, and I think it could be that they're still priced a little bit more down to earth. Although that said, if you look at what a decent 911 SC, let alone a good one, costs, they were stuck on $10,000 and $15,000 for years and years and years, and those days are gone. You got to pay a lot of money in the scheme of things for an old car like that, but they're still, fair to say, 65 to 70% the cost of a early 911. I mean, an early, let's say any 911S is somewhere between 175 and $200,000, a good one, and you can buy a car that's 10 years newer than that for under 100 grand. That's it's just as good condition, better in some ways. It's a 3-liter. It's got a nicer interior. Maybe not as pretty, arguably, because of the big bumpers and all that. But I think they're having a moment in a way, because the previous generation, the long hood cars, whatever you want to call it, have just gotten so damn expensive. And I think it takes a lot of people out of it, out of play a little bit.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Let alone the 356s that are completely insane. I don't know. I like it. So we're getting close to being out of time, Joe, but I do want to ask one question, and that is, what's next for Joe Buzzetta looking forward? You've been through a lot. I love the stories, and looking forward, obviously you're busy, family, kids, business, but what's next?
Well, probably, it's in terms of the hobby, I'd like to build more cars and, be known for that. I'd like to either help people build cars that they like, or, build them and then market them. Not necessarily to get rich from it. I don't think I would get rich from it. It's going to be a few cars here and there, but I just enjoy doing that. I was, I let friends drive my cars occasionally when I know that, they're going to be careful. I know that they'll appreciate it. um, which is why I wanted you to drive that 78 car that I have. And the fact that you enjoyed it so much made me realize that I should be helping people if they want help or if they want to buy something like that. Why not? And it's fun for me to build them. I mean, I'll say it's fun. It's also frustrating, building cars because I can't do it myself. I have to farm it out. I have the ideas, I have the vision, and I've been lucky to meet some really cool guys that are talented, and they like working with me, and we put my ideas, into actual practice. But I think that's what's next. I really enjoy that, and I've got to figure out how to make this a productive hobby. Like for me, just buying cars, storing them in a big garage or a warehouse. It's nice having them, but if for a while you're like, all right, I have that. Now what do I do with it? I can only drive one at a time. So I need to figure out a way to, you know, do something else with it, either build cars or make it into some kind of a club or something like that. I know
No,
those are
I
not really fresh ideas, but I think for me, that would be the fun of it.
no, I hope you do. I hope you do build and sell some bespoke 911s because you obviously are good at it, and you're able
Thank
to.
you.
It
It's
reminds me a
fun.
little bit of if someone were to go to a builder and say, "Build my dream house." Some builders are going to give you a dream house, and some builders are not.
Yeah.
And a builder that can get you a dream house with all the touches that you like, where you walk in, you go, "This feels like home." That's what we're
Yeah.
talking about. And I certainly felt that with that with your 78 SC because it felt very comfortable. It felt fun. It felt good. And
Yeah.
I would not have felt that way if it was too raw or too powerful, not
Hmm.
balanced.
Hmm.
Um, just for example, the shifting, and you said you didn't want it to feel like a racing car gated shifter. Nobody wants, I mean, well, some people do want that, but if you
Yeah. It
want to,
depends.
yeah, if you want to take that car through Vermont, you don't want that. And your car had balance and taste.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, that would be my goal would be to, help somebody build something like that or build it and present it to them and hopefully they just have a car that they can enjoy. I mean, that's really what it's about. My idea for this other car I'm building is it's a little more extreme. So I'm thinking perhaps I can offer that as one version and then offer the other one as a different version. And then just maybe give people a choice of seats, steering wheels. The other thing I like doing is I buy vintage Momo wheels and I have a guy in California that restores them. So I have a collection of those. And it'd be cool to, finish a car up and say, look, I'm going to let you try 3 different wheels. Tell me which one you like, or maybe you want to buy 2 wheels. I change the wheels all the time. It just gives the car a different feel. Stuff like that can be fun, I think, for people.
Well, inevitably after the process, you'd end up with a friend because you would be a lot of conversation, a lot of how about this, how about that, and then imagine they end up with a car that they love and they keep it forever, and it becomes a family heirloom.
Yeah.
How fun!
Or an enemy if they don't like the car, I guess.
I can't,
I have to change my address.
I can't imagine that happening, Joe. I can't imagine. Well,
I
this
hope
has
not.
been
You're very
great.
kind.
This has been great, and we, as Cars on Call, are very grateful to have you. We would love to have you back because there's a lot of
Okay.
stuff we couldn't
Sure.
get into, but we did cover a lot of ground. And on behalf of Stefan and Adams, I want to say thank you very much, Joe Buzzetta. We really appreciate it. For our listeners, subscribe, like, all that stuff, and keep listening.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun, and I didn't know what it would feel like to be here, but you and I know each other so long, so it's just kind of like what we do when we go out for dinner. We just talk about cars and stuff, but it was fun. I had a lot of fun, so thank you.
You're welcome. It's like being back on the bus, Joe.
It is really, yeah. And now we don't have to go to school, thank God.